It's another episode of the Shea Anything Podcast where the Mets still don't have a manager in place. They still don't have a general manager in place. They still don't have a president of baseball operations in place. However, we have Andy Martino in place to give us the latest on all three. Starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. It's Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you on this episode of the Shea Anything Podcast. A reminder, you can subscribe to the Shea Anything Podcast wherever you're listening. We appreciate it. And Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets. From the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. And weeknights, 6 o'clock, you can catch Andy and myself on Baseball Night in New York on actual television, 6 o'clock on SNY. All right, Andy. So another week goes by. We still have basically just your reporting to go off of, and nobody in place for the New York Mets at either of those three positions that I mentioned at the top of the show. The latest reporting that you have is that the Mets have interest in Billy Eppler potentially to fill one of those roles. Which role would that be, and why do you think that they have interest in this particular person?
That would be GM, most likely. They really, as we've talked about, they really have pretty much turned away from the president of baseball ops search unless somebody pops up that has to be given that role in order to hire them. I really do think that this David Stearns thing is not dead, depending on how the next couple of years play out. So there is that.
You mean like waiting for his contract to be up?
Yeah, I mean, you can't, put all your eggs in that basket, but you can avoid filling that position potentially if you think that in theory, and what if the shine comes off of Stearns over the next couple of years, who would that guy be at that time? No, that kind of mindset. So the people who are on the radar right now that I know of, Eppler, Raquel Ferreira, who's interviewing, and Sig Mejdal, all I would think, if there were fits there, which is too early to say that there would probably be offered a general manager title if they were offered anything.
So if any of those three people were to get the GM job, how involved in baseball ops do you think that would leave Sandy Alderson as the team president? Pretty
much what he was with Zack Scott, present and available, but delegating fully to someone else to run the baseball ops day to day.
So let's go down the line. I don't want to skip over the possibility of the Mets hiring all three because I think they're all interesting to analyze. Let's start with Eppler. Why do you think with somebody like Eppler, who's got kind of a checkered background in terms of his success in that role, why do you think he might make sense to Sandy, to Steve Cohen, to whoever is, suggesting that they interview him potentially?
Well, that would be the question. The lack of success with the Angels, for sure. And perhaps that would be something that would ultimately hold them back. But they know he's well connected in the industry. He's a talented guy, smart guy, personable, certainly very highly regarded by Brian Cashman and many years working under Cashman with the Yankees. And what they'd have to weigh with the Angels is Arte Moreno out there is pretty much known as the most difficult owner to work for in all of baseball. It'd probably be, if you took a poll of executives, it's probably what they would say. Meddling, and just it's hard to figure out what Eppler's decisions might have been versus what he was forced to do. The Mets would have to do homework on that and figure it out. Also, the another defense of him in Anaheim would be that it's a very difficult position for a GM to come in Mike Trout's prime, because the right thing to do for the organization probably would have been to take a step back, but you can't because Mike Trout is 26, 27, 28, and you have to try to win, even though the rest of your organization isn't there. So that was a challenge. And he inherited Albert Pujols' contract, one of the worst in baseball history. So those would be the things that could be said in his defense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, that, you're basically hit with a structure of an organization that probably isn't ready to win, but you've got the best player in the sport. And so that comes with pressure around you to win, even though it's not LeBron James in the NBA. One player can't make that big of a difference. So we'll see if they end up interviewing him, and if, he ends up being a finalist for the job. Raquel Ferreira, Andy, Coming from the Red Sox, we talked about this on Baseball Night in New York last night. Her background is fascinating. And look, I made the point that, all we know about basically Sandy Alderson and Steve Cohen and their hirings is Jared Porter, Zack Scott, what they decided to do together last offseason. And the point that you've made to me about Porter is that he comes from a scouting and, analytical background. So he can kind of, merge those two worlds. And that was the idea. With Ferreira, what background does she come from? And, where are her strengths?
Her strengths are her empathy, her communication skills, her basically like a very, very top human being in terms of working with all kinds of different people, collaborating, would probably be able to get buy-in as a leader from people under her, would probably come in and say, hey, you guys have been here. What do you recommend I do about, I don't know, Michael Conforto or what have you, like just a really, really good person to work with. The drawbacks are that she has very little experience managing up, which is a huge part of this job, meaning dealing with your president, dealing with your owner. She's been, that might sound like not a big deal, but it's a huge deal. Like when Sandy Alderson and Steve Cohen are calling you all day, how do you handle it? How do you keep them happy? That's a big, big part of a head of baseball ops job. And she's never had to do anything like that. So
she hasn't been answering to Dombrowski or Chaim Bloom or any of the people.
No, I mean like Sam Kennedy and John Henry and people like that. Cause we're talking about Cohen and Alderson. And by the way, what I'm saying is from calls I made yesterday on people that worked with her, I'm not opining here. I'm saying like, I'm hearing, man, she's a great person. Man, there's a lot of potential there. The lack of the experience, the learning curve would be in dealing with the media, which is important in New York. Basically, the only media stories she's done are like a few very nice features about her, but like the day-to-day grind of New York baseball reporting and being the face of an organization never had to do. Managing up to, Cohen is an involved owner, and how would she deal with that? There is the fact that she hasn't been an evaluator. Now, that's not necessarily at all a deal breaker. Sandy Alderson and Brian Cashman are not evaluators, so you can get around that. But those would be some of the drawbacks, and the pluses would just be the person that she is and the growth potential.
Yeah. And I think that those characteristics, the growth potential, her personality, those help with any nervousness you might have in terms of being in a front facing job, which is what general manager would be. And also to your point, I think it's an important clarification that it's not just managing up to, the next level in baseball ops. You're managing up to, as you said, a guy who's worked in Major League Baseball front offices forever and is still very powerful in this organization, and Sandy Alderson, and then a really involved owner, which with the deepest pockets in the sport in Steve Cohen. So whoever takes this job, it's probably going to be a unique circumstance in terms of managing up, not just if you've done it before or not. But I like the idea of, hiring somebody based on, how you think that their communication is and whether or not they treat people well. Because look, I know that you're saying she doesn't have experience in the front facing part of a GM role, but that's half the battle. And the battle is that basically every homestand, you talk to the media. You're the face of a front office. You're the face of whether or not your moves are working. And, it may be that there's some trade you make this offseason that like John Ricco or Bryn Alderson or Sandy Alderson or Steve Cohen really forced down, and made happen. And you have to be the one to answer to that in June when that hitter is batting 220. Yep. So that's what makes the job so unique. And I don't know, I think she's a really interesting person for the job. And it goes back to, look, you go back to the organization they're coming from. What type of franchise is it? And I think the Red Sox are obviously fascinating. Sig Mejdal, Andy, what do you know about him and his potential availability / interest and his ability to guide people into space?
Well, the latter, it seems like he has some experience with, more than being a number one in baseball. And then that's the issue. I talked to two people who worked with Mejdal this morning, and it's a very similar scouting report to Raquel Ferreira, in that great person, understands why Jeff Luhnow was not a great leader and did not have a good culture. So it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to that. By the way, not implicated in the Astros sign stealing scandal. I had never heard that he was when I was reporting on the issue. And then Major League Baseball also says that he was not in their investigation. So that's not really a concern. No experience being the leader, just like Ferreira. And by the way, this is not a gender-based criticism of Ferreira, because I think there's been some legitimate backlash that I've seen about people going, "Oh, Raquel Ferreira is just administrator," and people saying, "Well, that's a little sexist to diminish her accomplishments." And yeah, that definitely can be wielded as a sexist weapon, that kind of critique. But it's also a valid critique in her case and in Sig Mejdal's, to say you've never been front-facing, you've never managed up another issue with. Mejdal's, like Ferreira, is described as like a really, really nice, good person who has never had to be necessarily in that tough interaction with the owner or in a tough interaction with, Joel Sherman or whoever. Like, just like there hasn't been enough negativity to battle test these people in some ways, because they've been down the ladder a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a resume based critique.
Yeah.
And like when you're evaluating anybody for a job, have you done this before? And if you haven't, then it's a fair critique.
But I do think that diminishing a woman's accomplishments in the game comes a little knee jerk to some people, just like saying, "Oh, a diversity hire, and then that's not fair. But it is fair to say, like, here are the things she hasn't done, and here are the things that Sig Mejdal hasn't done. They're pretty similar. You're kind of, with both of them, you're getting a good human being who hasn't proven if they can or can't do the things that you're asking them to do now. So they both would be a risk in that sense.
Yeah, you're getting smarts and experience in certain places and lack of experience in others.
Another thing about Ferreira, and probably Mejdal too, although I'd have to double check, hasn't really talked trades with other GMs, hasn't really negotiated directly with agents on free agents, just stuff like that a GM does. You'd have to take a leap of faith.
Okay. But again, if you take a leap of faith on both of them because you think they're good people and because they're experienced baseball people and they get it, it's then useful to surround them with, and this is a point you've made, a very experienced structure. And that already exists with the New York Mets. Like, the names that I mentioned earlier, Brent Alderson, John Ricco, countless others, Andy, that and I don't, and the average fan doesn't, that are surrounding these people as soon as they get hired. That helps. And those people, like John Ricco, has made those calls. And so he could help Mejdal or Ferreira in terms of the verbiage or however you coach somebody through those things. You're going to be at the GM meetings next week. What do you expect overall from the Mets? We're talking about front facing. How important is it that Sandy Alderson may be the front facing person at those things?
How important is it in terms of, like, is it bad?
You could take it however you want to take it.
I mean, it is what it is. It's not, look, Sandy Alderson, this is not Joe Blow from Idaho and who's your interim GM. This is a guy who's has had quite a career. So if he's doing the work at the GM meetings, it's fine. It's really fine. The Mets, despite the fact that they are believing that fans and reporters are breathlessly covering this, really do remain less breathless. They're like, we're going to get this right. We're not in a rush. Chill out. I got a little talking to by someone just this morning on that aspect. If you guys are so...
if you're getting a talking to, you've been the one preaching patience.
Right. But then
refer that person to me and I'll tell them, look, Andy's been the one talking people off ledges.
Well, that may have to continue because they're just not in a hurry. Now, one of these interviewees could knock it out of the park and end up at the GM meeting still. But is today Wednesday? I'm flying out there Sunday.
Today is Wednesday.
Yeah, it's getting kind of hard to see anyone but Alderson. But I mean, for that week, that's completely arbitrary. Like, it doesn't matter.
Well, especially because there's going to be a work stoppage in.
Well, that helps the Mets quite a bit. I mean, a lot. Like, it's December. Everything in the industry is dead except for your executive search now. You don't have to so picture Sandy Alderson's day now. Like, on December 1st, where there is no work stoppage. Hey, I got Javi Baez's agent on line 1, and Scott Boras over here for Conforto, and Carlos Correa wants to talk, and are we gonna pursue Stroman or what? Blah 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 blah. Oh my God! And now I have to interview this candidate. Now it's just gonna be, who are my interviews today? Because there's no baseball business going on. So this helps the Mets quite a bit and puts them a lot less behind the 8 ball in this offseason. The offseason might be condensed into a very short period of time in several months.
You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Andy, you were first to report a couple days ago that the Mets are moving on from Zack Scott. He will not be in their front office going into next year. How did that play out? And, you know, if it all hadn't played out this way, if he, you know, hadn't been driving that night, is he still their general manager?
If Zack Scott had not been driving that night, he would be running the Mets potentially for years to come. It's really, when you think of it on a human level, it's tough. Honestly, I mean, you can't help but feel for the guy. We all make mistakes. That's a big one. If he was driving and you know, in that case, obviously really terrible things could happen. He hasn't been to trial yet. I don't know if he was drinking or not or what. So I'm not saying, I'm just saying that that's tough when you work hard for 20 years, move your family to New York, make a mistake, and it completely changes the direction of everything. Because yeah, he'd be the guy, and they wouldn't probably be they'd do a search, but it would be different.
But they were happy with his ability to run.
He was good. He was good. Like, that guy could have done the job. Now, you can't criticize a team for moving on under those circumstances, but that guy could have done this job well. I strongly believe. I watched him do it for a year. I covered it. He's good.
So they had a chance when the news first broke, you know, to say, look, we're trying to hire somebody else anyway. We're going to move on from Zack Scott. They also had a chance to wait until after his court date, you know, to see if, you know, he's found guilty of this crime, then we move on. And if he's not guilty, then you stick with him. Why did they decide to kind of do neither and kind of split the difference here and, you know, not wait for the process to play out and instead decide somewhere in the middle?
Well, my understanding of that, which is not complete because I wasn't privy to all these meetings that were happening a few days ago. I mean, I wasn't there, obviously. And there were, I'm sure, a lot of legal conversations and HR conversations or what have you that were complex. But the way I understand it is World Series is about to come to an end. Off season is about to begin. It's time to be a little more clear on their direction with that position. So that may have forced the hand. There were a lot of conversations about him and what to do with him because he was good. But ultimately they went with, he did that.
Yeah. And it's not easy to wait for the legal process to play out when you're trying to figure out who to hire for what job. So if they had kept Scott as a GM, would they have had any interest still in hiring a president of baseball ops between him and Sandy?
If his name was David Stearns, yes.
Okay.
But they're not. I think it probably would have been. And by the way, like a front office of this front office, Zack Scott on down would have been totally fine. The Mets would have been on course. Like, he wasn't one of these superstars, but it's too bad that happened because we're probably not even having this conversation about a search if it had. Yeah, they would have tried to talk. They would have tried to talk to Stearns, Epstein, Bean. Like, of course, I guess with those people, they felt like they had to see if that was going to work, but I don't think we'd be talking about Daniel Adler or whatnot if
right.
Scott were in the job.
Another thing that broke, I think it was over the weekend, that Bob Melvin is going to be the next manager of the Padres. And this was at least surprising to me. And I've since kind of learned that I guess shouldn't have been. I didn't realize that it was a foregone conclusion that, he was probably not going to be back with the A's first.
It wasn't. He had a chance to stay. Yeah.
And, the news as of, a couple of days ago or yesterday was that, he preferred to stay on the West Coast all along. Was your reporting on this, Andy, when you first heard the story, like, whoa, why didn't the Mets do whatever they could to get this guy? Or did you know more than I did and know that they probably weren't going to go in that direction no matter what?
I don't know what you know or what I knew or who knew what, but I will say that I saw something written that, like, how could the Mets not have known? It's like, do you really think logically that with Sandy Alderson's relationship with Billy Beane and the Oakland A's, that if this was going on, that he wouldn't have any inclination? Of course not. Melvin lives in Arizona. As we were talking about on BNNY with Aaron Boone like 3 weeks ago, why wouldn't you want to go manage the Padres instead of being this miserable town if you had the chance? So there probably was the way it was going to go. I think, look, Melvin had 1 year left. They picked up his option. The A's are going into another one of these rebuild things. So it was like, okay, go talk to other teams. And then there was a fit with the Padres and they popped up with the announcement. The Mets, of course, were aware, and would have looked down that road, but then found that wasn't happening.
Yeah. I mean, look, you can get more property in, the New York, New Jersey area. Like a big backyard is easier to come by than it is in Southern California. That is it's the only pro I can think of.
That's a good point. My yard's pretty small. But I'm not.
But you have a yard. I've been in your yard. You have a yard with green grass and the ability to teach your son baseball, which I decided to do because you hadn't. I think.
Oh my God.
I taught your son how to make contact and see ball, hit ball. He was like, "Wow, Doug, my dad."
He said something like, "I wish I had a real father," or something along those
exactly.
lines.
But anyway, in Southern California, you're lucky if you get any yard whatsoever because, there's so many people packed into that paradise because everyone wants to live there. Other than that, yes. Why would any sane, rational human being choose anywhere over San Diego? I don't know. We're as two people coming to you, living in the tri-state area who have seemingly made up their minds not to live there. It's paradise. And it comes with such a lack of pressure to win compared to here. And I'm not going to lie, like as a human being, if you're making the same money and it comes with less scrutiny, look, you're like, if what I just said makes you angry, then like think a little bit deeper about it. Come on.
I played a little game once with some friends. You might've been a part of it. We've been talking about this in the office. I don't know what I talked about. It's like, if you were a baseball player, where would you want to sign? Where would you want to play? And mine wasn't the Padres. Mine was the Dodgers because but it's the same answer. I love Southern California.
This was the newsroom.
Uniform. I like the Dodger uniform better. Those camo, like once a week things would kind of be a deal breaker for me. Those are some of the ugliest uniforms other than the White Sox shorts in the 70s. So that's a thing. I mean, the Padres are still like the Padres. So I would be a Dodger, but if I had to choose between being a Padre and being a Yankee or a Met, I'm probably going to be a Padre for the reasons that you said.
In terms of next steps, Andy, the things in terms of the Mets actually putting a team together that maybe you will be discussing with whoever's there representing the Mets at the GM meetings. What are the first baseball decisions that you think they're going to be making? Is it qualifying offer? Is there something even before those things? What is it?
Minor league free agency is beginning imminently. That's not sexy, but it's very important. That's how you build the roster depth to create the bench mob, which turned out to be the best part of the Mets season. That's how good teams fill out the bottoms of the rosters with good players. So that's a really important thing that's going on right now. Minor league free agency. In the qualifying offers. Yeah.
So when Work stoppage included in your answer. When will they decide on Conforto and Syndergaard?
I think it's 5 days after the World Series is the deadline, I believe. So
you don't think they've already made that decision?
I have been so busy with this damn search that I haven't asked.
You keep forgetting, or?
No, literally, I keep forgetting. I'm reporting my butt off about the executive search. I'm only one person. I need a staff if you want me to answer these questions.
Let's provide Andy with a staff note to the company. So what if you were talking to a source and they were like, yep, we have interest in interviewing Billy Eppler. And then you were like, oh, are you going to have Noah Syndergaard on your team next year? And
I could do that. I should do that, but you get
and that person was like, no, we've decided nobody's asked he will not be on our team next year. You'd have a scoop.
Well, maybe I should, Doug, but there's a lot going on.
Anyway, I'll be here doing nothing but judging you.
Yeah. Why don't I delegate that one to you?
A little behind the scenes.
Or are you too busy waiting to come into the office at 4:00 for your 6 o'clock show?
Okay. It's safety protocols. All right. That affects my arrival time.
Sure. Yeah.
Little behind the scenes for you listeners out there. We have edited this podcast in an unknown time code because Andy got a phone call from a source, which we are now going to let him take. But a reminder, this has been the Shea Anything Podcast. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate it. Another reminder, the Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely only on Verizon. Andy, thank you. We will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you next week.